Okay.
Hi, it's Jacqueline Hughes Simon here interviewing Brenda Hillman, who's a poet and educator at St. Mary's College in Moraga, California, on the 8th of May, 2012. Thanks for being with us, Brenda.
Glad to be with you.
Great. Where were you born?
In Tucson, Arizona.
And where were your parents born?
My mother was born in Brazil, in São Paulo, Brazil, and my dad was born in Mississippi, right near Hattiesburg, in Neely, Mississippi.
Would you characterize your family of origin as political or activist?
Political, but not activist, I would say, yeah.
I've known you for many years and I'm familiar with your activism. Could you characterize your activism and elaborate on its beginning?
Well, I was a student activist in the late 60s and 70s with the Vietnam protests, and that's probably those are probably the origins with the student movement. And as for what happened over the years, many kind of configurations, but I guess most recently in the last decade I've been participating in social justice and anti-war activities with Code Pink a lot, and most recently with Occupy. But I guess I'm also an activist at a local level on St. Mary's campus, and try to work for social change wherever I am. Yeah.
How are you an activist at St. Mary's?
Well, in a very small way, we have a social justice and peace vigil every week. And I started that and get out there and at least stand for, I guess, various anti-corporate, anti-war, pro-social justice, pro-women's rights, and whatever needs to be defended on campus, I try to participate in it.
How was that received here?
Pretty well. I mean, it's a campus with a lot of, I'd say, a great variety of opinions and feelings about where we are as a society, and it's probably predominantly Catholic, but has a great tolerance for many different points of view. I find it a very open community. It's not always everyone's favorite thing to speak out against, particularly war and military activities, but it's there's enough of a community on campus that appreciates the message. Yeah. And I have a lot more to say about the other parts of my activism, but maybe that'll come up.
Some would say the Occupy movement emerged as a response to the 2008 financial crisis. How did that crisis affect you?
Well, I guess it mainly affects me as part of a culture that I feel is going not only economically in the wrong direction, but it affects my students, it affects my family. I'm way less concerned personally about my own, about the financial impact that it might have on me than what I suffer with others. I feel it's pretty criminal and horrible that we've taken a particular direction, which is, I'd say, more like 150-year pattern of going in the wrong direction, as part of a corporate culture that's bought into just the idea that capitalism is the unquestioned right way to go. So it's less perhaps it's less had less of a personal impact um, than it has on me as a part of a society, part of a system. Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street started in September of 2011. Is that when you became aware of it?
I became aware of it immediately, yeah, because I follow the news, and I thought, wow, great, go, yeah, immediately.
How would you describe your response to the movement?
Well, my immediate response was that I wanted to be out there, immediately involved, and I was very used to protesting because of being, involved with Code Pink for quite a while. So, I basically give, a day a week at least to just political activity. And so I thought, well, right away, I would love to camp. I can't realistically camp. I've got a very demanding job, and I'm too old to do a lot of it. It's too physically exhausting to camp, but I figured I could do a lot of everything else, and yeah.
So Occupy Oakland made a presence not long afterwards. How were you involved at that point?
Well, I went to some of the General Assemblies, and I went to the plaza a lot just to see how people were living, and to really, I don't know, maybe it's an odd word to use, but to enjoy the fact that there was suddenly a resistance movement that seemed to have gotten attention that wasn't benign and immediately approved of. I think people have been so used to seeing either anti-war or other kinds of protests as something that could be easily dismissed by the press, and the fact that it wasn't dismissible, so it was great. And I loved the fact that the plaza in particular was very confrontational. The activities there were confrontational. So anyway, I took part in the marches and the strikes. And then in move-in day on January 28th, I was there with that day. And I wish I could just be doing more. It's just I've had a very demanding year with my employment. But
on November 9th, 2011, there were demonstrations on the campus of UC Berkeley. During the day, demonstrators tried to erect tents and were beaten and arrested. That evening, you and your husband, along with many others, participated in a demonstration. Could you speak about your experience?
Yeah, well, we were down at Oakland. We were actually at the plaza for a General Assembly where there were a couple of really important votes. And we had talked earlier about actually staying at Cal campus before going down to Oakland, but we decided, since there wasn't anything really going on, we drove by and there wasn't really anything going on at Sproul Plaza, so we went on to Oakland. And I got a text from a friend saying that the police were supposed to come back at 10 to remove the rest of the tents, but I got a text from a friend saying that they had come back, that they were coming back early, and this was around 9:20 or 9:15 or something like that. And I'm not sure exactly how he knew, but I think the police were arriving. And so I said to Bob, let's go down over there, and we need to help the students. And so we went, and we went there right as the phalanx of police were arriving to block the tents, or to begin removing the rest of the tents. And being, part of Code Pink is I'm not really afraid of police, and I'm not afraid of of talking back to them particularly. I mean, I know that they can do harm, but I wasn't afraid, for personal safety. So we went right up there, and we began to just try to talk to them about not hitting the students. And there weren't that many people there then. There were just maybe, I don't know, not many at all. The tents they were trying to form a line and to remove the tents, and they were beginning to get the young people there out. And anyway, we just we stood right near the police, and it got very intense very quickly. Because the police, I guess, were under orders to use, they're called batons or nightsticks or whatever the sticks are called, and they wanted to clear a particular space so that the kids could go through. Or be ejected or be pushed or whatever. And so they had an idea of this little space that they were going to clear, and so we just kept talking and kept getting closer, and at a certain point they pushed us and hit Bob with the baton. But by then there were lots and lots of people in back of us. But I think it's useful for the adults, for older people, adults, to be like right up front, because it's much less likely that they would want to shove and hit old people. And so I said, Bob, let's stand there and we've got to defend, protect them, because they're not gonna want to hit us. Well, they did, and in fact, do it. But that's, what do you think? Honestly. So I kept yelling at them, and and they, it doesn't help to yell. It doesn't help.
It doesn't help. You are both a poet and professor at St. Mary's College. Has being an academic had any effect on your activism?
Well, I think it's all part of education. I think education takes many forms, and I don't think of the university or the college. I mean, this is a beautiful setting and idyllic in lots of ways, but I don't think we had an amazing little tent city out here a few years ago, and honestly, I wrote this in a note to a friend. Our little tent city should have been a model to UC, because the administrators came out every day, they talked to the students, they let them sleep, they stayed out there, they brought them help, they conversed with them. That all the students' demands weren't met to the letter, and the students were somewhat frustrated, but not anything like what happened at the UCs. And I attribute this to a real dialogue that this administration set up with the students, who they were actually willing to talk to the students, and the students were able to stay in the tents until they were ready to take them down. So I guess the relationship between I love being a teacher from books, and I also love being a teacher from example. And I see it as fitting together, that you can read theory and political theory and cultural theory and give that to the students, and you can read political poetry, non-political poetry, you can give that to the students, and you can also show, an example with your life. And just on November 9th, one of our St. Mary's students was there, and he got beaten and arrested by the UC police force. I guess it was actually the Alameda Sheriffs, but anyway, he was really very badly hurt, and so I felt as if it was just as important to be out there, for the students, showing an example of being there with them, not just removing myself. Yeah.
You wrote a beautiful piece for Evening Will Come, a Poetics Journal, in which you likened the demonstrators and yourself to ants. Why ants?
I admire ants so much. I mean, I think ants are amazing. And, well, for one thing, I was thinking about how resilient they are, and how, they do form lines, and they do make like communications with their feelers, and how in some way when you're involved in a piece of action, you are communicating almost like, even though you're yelling or whatever, you are communicating through various means, and we don't really know all the chemical communication with the non-human species, but I think we can learn a lot from non-human species about subtlety, and about carrying our relationship into an action, instead of being out there as like individual actors of like, look at me or something. It's much more about being in a line together as a line of people who are doing right for the group. And I know probably the police perceive themselves in a similar way, but I feel very committed to the idea of this communication for building the society. And so that was part of it. And I think in that poem I tried to represent, it's a prose poem, but at a certain point there's what I think of as a rupture in the text, where the piece of prose kind of separates, and that's meant to get at the idea of the police brutality getting a really inappropriate amount of wrong-headed, stupid energy into a society, a moment in society where resistance is really occurring in the right way. Yeah.
Your politics and poetry seem deeply synergistic. Do you see this as a form of activism?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, I've written about this a lot, but I don't see poetry as accomplishing anything in the same way that activism does. I mean, I think that poetry is meant to be, mysterious, indecisive, subtle, involved with nuance, involved with paradox, involved with dream nature, and in all of these ways. I think that if it turns polemical, it's automatically kind of endangering itself. But poetry belongs in resistance movements, is my utter absolute feeling. Like, art and poetry and all forms of art belong with political resistance, belong with places where societal change is going to occur, for the better. And if it's not occurring for the better, then it should be, remarked upon by the artists and committed to. And so in that way, I feel like they're just like this, that you can be an artist and an activist in the very same body moment, but that doesn't mean that poetry is the same as political action, if you know what I mean. Because I've done both, and I know working with the state legislature with Code Pink, that was a whole different order of using language. You can't confuse the two. And you bring a poem to your legislator, and he or she might appreciate it, or even be scared that he's going to end up in a poem, but it's not the same as trying to work on legislation. Now, that said, I've gotten very, I'm not only cynical, I'm very dark-hearted about actually participating in the legislative and electoral process after trying to work with that for several years. So that's probably a whole other question.
Some would say there is a strong vein of anarchism running through the Occupy movement, and that it's determined to move the political dialogue outside of the mainstream. Do you agree that this exists? And if so, what are the consequences?
Yes, I do. And yes to the consequences. I think, well, to go to the previous question, to go to the previous question about art, I feel like it is a part of it that we can accept the unknown, the unpredictable, and the absolutely radical nature of the human imagination and the human, relationship to experience. And as soon as we start policing that art, then it's, I don't know, it's anti-art. I'm an absolute romantic in that way. I believe in the freedom of, subject matter form. I believe in the freedom to make objects of art. Anarchy is not in itself a bad thing. It depends on what you're talking about. I mean, anarchy in the bedroom, as long as nobody's getting hurt. Anarchy in your work of art. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want anarchy when it comes to traffic signals. Let's just put it that way. I do like that there are red lights and green lights and that people observe them, but there's been entirely too much emphasis, I think, worrying about the anarchy of the Occupy movement, especially as it's defined itself as leaderless. It's, as people keep saying over and over, it's still very young. I hope it'll have many incarnations. And if we change the name, it's still going to be something of what has been awakened, which I think is a very specific set of stuff, which is real anger over economic inequality that has been going on for a long time in particular ways that privileges very few. And I think that's an awakening that isn't about, either questions about tactics or questions about, who's sleeping in the tents or not. I think it's about a much bigger societal awakening.
You were at Frank Oscar Grant Plaza. Do you prefer one or the other?
I do like Oscar Grant Plaza because I think it acknowledges the unfair brutality that was laid on the head, on the body of this young man who was murdered and who didn't get, appropriate retribution for the murderer. And I feel that's disgraceful. And I do like that this name has been used to honor his life or, try to reverse the injustice. So, I'm not opposed to Frank if people want to call it that. It's cool.
So we'll call it Oscar Grant Plaza today. Yeah. On May 1st, a week ago, reading poetry. Was this demonstration significantly different than the others?
Well, I was there. I just showed up. I took the day off of work because I felt like it was a strike day and it had been called for good reason. And I went to the plaza and I met some poet friends and we read some poems in the lawn, and there was just a wonderful variety of poems read, and it's a little hard to hear over the blast of noise. But I read with my friend Jillian Hamill. I read a Robert Duncan poem, Passages 13. And it's an amazing poem. It's not a like rant poem or anything, but we read it kind of in taking turns. And the feeling of the crowd was, I'd say, festive. Mostly, it was festive. There was a large police presence. I was, of course, disturbed by the tear gassing and the brutality that was laid on people's heads. I thought for very poor reasons, but I didn't see every bit of it. But it just pointed out again to me how the inappropriate nature of the police response to what is, people living at the fringes, and people objecting to what has become a dominant and upsetting course that the society is taking. And to call in to turn this into a police state over it. Oakland has become a police state. And overnight, and people are discouraged, and Oakland citizens are discouraged, but they should get out there. They should get out there and be a part of it, and not, I mean, you were there, and my sense is that that there wasn't the number of bodies, that there weren't as many people as really felt a part of it. And I don't know whether that's because a certain apathy has set in again, or whether people are confused about either tactics, or afraid, or just bummed by the police actions, or what is going on. But there was, anyway, it started out festive, and then it ended up with, lots of other stuff. I have to say I didn't stay till the end of the day. Yeah.
We're having presidential elections in November. Do you see Occupy, the movement, helping or hurting Obama's chance of re-election?
Well, I don't know. I actually don't know. I can't really say about that. I've become very disillusioned with national political elections. Just let's put it that way. And I don't like the rhetoric, and I don't enjoy the rhetoric of lesser of two evils. I don't think that's very helpful. So as far as what Occupy has to do with anything, I feel as if the values of it have to just keep being reasserted over and over, and that people who are angry and bummed about the course that things are taken, that have taken, should not give up the strong pummeling objection to the direction of this thing. And I would say it's not about reform. It's not about tinkering with the present system. It just isn't. It's not.
So there has been criticism that Occupy has no message. Do you agree with this criticism?
No, I don't. I feel, as I've stated, I feel it is about, waking up a society to a profound disparity and a rising disparity between people who own the profit system and people who are victimized by the profit system. And it's not as simple as one theory versus another. I don't feel that it is. I think that there are a variety of messages that have come out of it, but really it's the overriding thing has to do with economic inequality and the corporate control of not just the companies and the military, but even the messaging itself. I mean, it's almost impossible to get the knowledge that isn't mediated by corporations. So you find yourself at every level compromised, even in the ways we receive knowledge about such a movement. So I do feel like it's economic. I do feel it's about a populist sort of anger and rising against a dominance by money and the privileged few. And where we can take it and how we can go with it, I don't know. But it ties in with with Pentagon. It ties in with U.S. imperialism. It ties in with the products that we put up with. It ties in with Keystone and whether we should tolerate environmental degradation based on the fact that a few companies are going to profit from this and the rest of us are going to suffer, including the earth and the manatees and every creature on earth. And then I think even impacts, how messages about, family structure are packaged. I mean, who can participate in the culture and who gets to get married or not. It's so I think that that Occupy is about trying to wake people up to inequality, but especially economic inequality and how dominant it has been.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Is there anything that you feel you would like to answer or speak to that I haven't asked a question about?
Well, I guess just as a poet, I'd like to, talk to all the imaginative people out there, and that means every single one of you, and just, ask you to take your imaginations, whether you're artists or not, take your imaginations into various forms of protest, because it doesn't have to be about, only about marching and about organized or anarchic uprisings. It can be about individual actions. I mean, I've been encouraging my friends and with my women friends talking about doing various forms of mourning and moaning, public moaning at the gas pumps in particular, like whenever you pump gas, doing a moaning action where you object to what you're doing, like right in the middle of pumping gas. And it's one thing I do every time I put gas in my car, like loudly moan, so that it embarrasses people around you. Because I do feel like we have to come up with many more imaginative actions and not put up with the kind of intolerable direction that we see things going. Really just maintain a place of loving but imaginative resistance. Yeah.
Brava! What a great example. Thank you, Brenda.
You're welcome. Thank you for having my statement on the air.
This is Jacqueline Hughes Simon at the 8th of May 2012 with Brenda Hillman. Thank you.
Did it record, you think? Did it record, you think? Did it record, you think? Did it record, you think?